Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on miamighostchronicles.com. Go to marlenepardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, just visit Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi everybody, how's everybody doing? This is Marlene with Stories of the Supernatural, and here we are back again. And I know you guys are all used to hearing all the weird noises, but today the show I'm doing it in the middle of the day, so you're going to hear more of my chickens and the roosters back because they're outside my window. And I think they put out a memo that all the roosters come under the window of my office and they will start to crow there. I think it's a conspiracy, to be honest with you. But anyway, let me talk about my sponsor. One of my sponsors is Plan to Stay. See what I mean? Plan to Stay Safe. And they've got a lot of neat gadgets. They've got like the nanny cams. They've got travel alarms. Let's say you're going to go traveling and you want to put alarm, let's say on the doorknob of your hotel room. They've got neat stuff like that. They've got all these little gadgets. If you want to put a hidden camera on your eyeglasses, this is like I Spy stuff. They've got all that neat stuff. In other words, they also have like how can I say, cameras for inside your home, not the big things, but stuff like you can move around. That's why it's planned to stay safe, whether you're at home or whether you're traveling. Stuff that's, how can I say, it's portable. All right. Portable that you can take with you, and the neat little gadgets and things like that. So go ahead and find them at plantostaysafe.com. Plantostaysafe.com. They've got a lot of good items, like I said, that the average person can use. All right, it's not necessarily the most high tech or somebody that is like into the deep security service. This is for the everyday person, okay, to safeguard their property, their person, whether you're at home or traveling or even jogging, they've got something for you. And they've got a great line of self-defense products for women as well. So check them out. Okay, and before anybody says anything about the chickens, okay, I'm gonna renege on my chicken videos. I've got to get out there and take some chicken videos. It's just been crazy out here where we're at. We've got a lot of things going on. But anyway, guys, let me get on to introduce who I have as a guest. This is a first-time guest here on Stories of the Supernatural, and her name is Miriam Van Scott. And she lives in Charleston, South Carolina, was born in Washington, D.C., raised in Northern Virginia, and she attended George Washington University and George Mason, earning a BA in journalism in 1992. She started her career working in public relations for private corporations and government agency, and worked as a photojournalist for the Fairfax Journal, Manassas Journal Messenger, and Prince William Junction News. Her early gigs included running site PR for the very first Lollapalooza tour in 1991. I remember Lollapalooza. And interviewing Watergate mastermind G. Gordon Liddy. After the publication of her first book in 1998, she became a full-time freelance writer. Her articles and photos have appeared in over 30 publications, ranging from Good Housekeeping magazine to the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, TV shows and podcasts. She's provided content to the History Channel, Sci-Fi, the Learning Channel, ABC News, Paramount Entertainment Group, Media General, and many others. Her debut novel, Bandun Gate, a fact-inspired horror story about murder, hauntings, and paranormal battles along Charleston's cursed shore, is an Amazon bestseller. And help me welcome her. How are you doing today, Miriam?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me, Marlene.
On the contrary, it is my pleasure. And for the audience, we were talking right before we started rolling, we were talking about your work. And I want to say, how long ago? 20 years ago, you published a nonfiction book, a reference book, as you said, titled Encyclopedia of Hell. And I'd like to ask you, what what made you want to put that book together? Or how did you come up
Um,
with that idea?
I actually came up with the idea because at the time I was looking for a book like that. I was looking for a book that would sort of, in one volume, bring together different descriptions of the underworld from different religions and myths and artwork. Because before, if you wanted to do any research on the afterlife, you would literally need to get a bunch of books on religion and a bunch of books on myth and a bunch of books on pop culture references and a bunch of books on art and literature. And it was pretty cumbersome. And I thought it would be great to have just one source to pull it all together. A book like that didn't exist, so I pitched the idea to an agent, and she liked it, and then she was able to sell it to St. Martin's Press.
Okay. And we were talking earlier. So when you published this book, this was 1998. And for those people who are not a little bit younger, shall we say, there was a time when the internet wasn't around, or not as the way we have it now, where research is not as easy as it is now. And exactly what you were saying, you would have had to spend hours and hours in a library or somewhere just to start getting into that. Because let me ask you, I imagine the concept of hell. This is, it's not a Judeo-Christian concept at all, right?
No, it goes back thousands of years, back to the Babylonians. Uh, Egyptians had a concept of a dark afterlife. Even Eastern religions, they also have uh, parts of the afterlife that even the ones that believe in reincarnation believe that the soul will spend time in another realm where it will be tortured or at least punished. So it's pretty much a universal concept.
Right.
The first ruler of hell was actually a female in the Babylonian myth. So
Really? Who's
it's
that?
because Ereshkigal, she was
Okay.
she descended to the underworld and ended up becoming trapped there. She became the sort of the mistress of the damned. Um,
Okay.
I only bring that up because again, people think, oh, the oldest concepts of hell are like you're saying, Judeo-Christian concepts of
Mm-hmm.
Lucifer and Satan, but really, there's much more to it than that.
Right. We always think of Lucifer,
Right.
cast out of heaven because he rebelled against God, and then he's, put to rule over hell. That's the one that everybody thinks of as, yeah, he's the one that runs hell. And people don't realize that there's an ancient pre-Christian
Mhm.
Judeo version. Um, if we go around that central idea of hell, or at least a place where you get punished, for, and you think about it. Um, was there were all these concepts that you ran across, were they like for eternity, or were they like you stay there for a while and then you get out?
There's actually pretty much a range. Some of them are for eternity. Some
Okay.
of them are you are punished and then you are released or reincarnated. Some of them you're punished for a certain amount of years and then annihilated. So that's what I'm saying. They sort of run the gamut. And even religions, there are many Eastern religions that they don't really have a system of reward and punishment per se, the way we think of it in the Judeo-Christian. Um, in those theories, what they believe in is that in the afterlife, it's sort of a time of, for lack of a better phrase, you get what you deserve. And
Mm-hmm.
so if souls are suffering in the afterlife, it's because it's a direct action of because what they did on earth. There's nobody from the outside enforcing punishment on them. It would be the same thing that if you drink too much, you get a hangover. If you eat
Right.
spoiled food, you get sick. There's nobody, oh, pushing that onto you. You have done that to yourself, and now you have to deal with it.
Right. Cause and
So
effect.
exactly. So the ideas of hell sort of run the gamut of, like you were saying, from the idea that it's eternal to it's temporary and then you're forgiven, it's temporary and then you're reincarnated, it's temporary and then your soul just ceases to exist.
Right. And you see, in even a lot of these ancient, especially if you had some wealth where they absolutely believed in that afterlife, where they would kill horses, animals, people, servants, all these things that were supposedly going to serve them, in the
Right.
afterlife, and I take it they were assuming they weren't going to go to hell, you know.
Well, that's in some of the old traditions, I guess Egyptian is the best known one because of the pyramids.
Hmm.
Yeah, the idea is whatever you were in life, you would just sort of continue that in the afterlife. So if you were a rich king, yeah, you would bury a bunch of food and supplies and animals with
Yes.
you, and then you would have access to them in the next world. Unfortunately, if you were a slave in this world, you would usually be killed and then put in the pyramid to with the idea that you would then become a slave in the afterlife.
Right. There was no getting away from it. Which
Right.
is my, it makes you wonder though, who came up with that idea, that version of the afterlife for the Egyptians? I bet you it was a rich person.
It definitely was, I'm sure.
Yeah, no commoner is going to buy into that and be like, "Are you kidding
No.
me?"
But back
But
then, I mean, the people, the priests
yeah,
had to stop the line that the kings wanted. The people who
yeah,
came up with stories, they had to do what the king wanted or they'd be the next to go. So I'm sure there was a lot of
yeah,
influence.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And no, I was also reading another article that the Vikings, there was a, they found some the same thing that uh, they would kill like their favorite animals, and they would
Mhm.
take all their swords and all their what, let's say if they represented, let's say they were a warrior, all these things like you said, it was across the board. All these different cultures had this belief of what I've got here now, I'm going to
Mhm.
have in the afterlife.
Mhm.
So if you enjoyed war now, for you heaven would be I could go off to
Yeah.
war in heaven. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's incredible, the mentality. But again, those were usually, a lot of these ancient discoveries that they come across are usually people up the food chain in these cultures.
Right.
You never come across that much of the regular people, the common or the slaves or the servant class or whatever, or farmers. They kind of like, you
Right.
know, you were
They didn't
lucky
have,
to,
even if they had the ability to come up with the ideas or to try to gain followers or whatever, they would have no way to pass that knowledge down. They didn't have
right.
access to the supplies you would need back then to create, tablets, then
Yeah,
engravings and everything else. So all of what we get from the ancient world is from definitely it's from the tippy top of the pyramid
right.
of
Yeah,
hierarchy of power.
exactly. Yeah, literacy. And in all these cultures, you know, you find that because you were telling me uh, that what you just stated, I didn't know that. What else did you come across that you thought was unusual when you were doing that research on that Encyclopedia of Hell?
I was amazed there's actually a lot more overlap than people realize between
Okay,
religions in their greater concepts. Obviously, there's a lot of contradictions, but there's some overlap. The older civilizations tend to put a lot more emphasis on how you spend eternity is determined by your station in life or how you died. For
right.
example, if you died and were not buried, then you couldn't have a peaceful afterlife. If you died, like you were saying, in battle, then you went to the Hall of the Great Kings and you got to spend eternity playing war games, basically. But then there was a lot of overlap too. Every single culture that I studied had one sin in common that would immediately the equivalent of damn people, and that was harm to children.
Really?
Even religions that sacrificed children, they didn't believe they were harming children. They believed they were sending those children on to a better afterlife. But all civilizations have had very, very strict, terrible punishments for people who would murder children or abuse them or deliberately bring
Isn't that
harm.
incredible? But yes, you do hear of some of these cultures, Mesoamericans, and even ancient, from what I understand, in Eastern Europe and, all that area, that they would have ritual sacrifices of adults and children. But I understand what you mean as far as that, how can I say it? There was no malice being there.
Right.
I'm
They thought
assuming
they
there
were
was no
sending them
malice
on
towards
to
the
a better
child.
destiny. Right. Their
Yeah,
attitude is you're going on to something better. You would suffer here on earth. You wouldn't have a grand life. We're sending you on to something glorious. But you're right. There was no malice
right,
involved. They weren't trying to hurt the children.
right. And let me ask you, as far as in other cultures, because like I said, everybody's very familiar with Lucifer, devil, Satan, whatever you
Mhm.
want to call him. Was there equivalence in other cultures to, let's say, the Satan persona? Okay.
There,
As
a
far
lot of
as
cultures have some sort of person who is the bureaucrat of hell. In
okay.
some cases, it's a torturer. In some cases, it's a judge. In some cases, it's a records keeper. And then in a lot of cases, it's literally just sort of a bureaucrat who keeps the logistics of everything, of where people should be and what they should be doing. But differs from Satan in that in not all cultures, it's not always somebody who is angry, who delights in torture. In a lot of cases, it's just someone who this is their station. This is just their job, basically, is to kind of keep things running. But it's not like a gleeful, oh, I'm so happy I get to torture these souls. They
right,
don't
right, which
have a
is
they don't have a ruler like that.
now you were telling me that you came across stuff that back when you were writing this book, pre-Y2K, you thought, boy, this is dark. I'll just keep this to myself. Can you give an
Right.
example, a couple of examples of what you came
Sure.
across?
There were a lot of sort of step-by-step guides to make literally the equivalent of poison, how to poison
Mm-hmm.
people and put them under quote unquote spells. And some of them were lethal, but some of them would just incapacitate people. There were a lot of really terrible crime reports. People who said that they were doing things, to glorify Satan or whatever, but a lot of it was just debauchery.
Yes.
Um, and a lot of that was pretty dark. Um, I had done a lot of interviews. Like I talked to an exorcist, I talked to various clerics, and a lot of times I'd done interviews, and they told me a lot of really interesting things, but
Mm-hmm.
they didn't really fit my subject matter. My subject matter was hell, the place of hell, the realm of hell. So, like if they were telling me about something that happened at an exorcism they were doing, or a dark spirit, from their own that they'd come in contact with, or someone had told them about, that wouldn't necessarily make the cut of the book just because it didn't fit into the overall concept. I wasn't
Right.
writing a catalog of demons or of demonic activity, but I kept all that information. I kept all the notes.
Right.
I
A-
just as a writer, I keep everything. I'm a research writer. I keep everything, and then yeah, and then I was able to use it in this most recent book.
And I'm gonna. This is the thing. When you, I was a matter of fact, I was getting through. I don't know if you're familiar. This is a book, The Ultimate Evil, that Maury Terry wrote about the Son of Sam murders
Mhm.
back in the 70s. And his theory was that the murders, and not everybody was killed. It was, in other words, it was a group. It wasn't
Right.
just David Berkowitz. And his what he proposed was, and he was pretty convincing, what he that it was Satanists who had randomly gone around killing people, like you said, as part of whatever they were, how they were worshiping, as
Mhm.
Satanists. Very dark stuff, what they were. And it's almost like that you think, how much of this is Satanism? If you want to call it Satanism, it is, but how much of it are we talking a warped personality? You
Oh
understand what
yeah.
I'm saying?
Oh yeah. I'm sure, like you're saying, we'll probably never know, like you said, for a
Yeah.
lot of these killers, how much of it was that they seriously had some kind of mental issue. And the
Mm-hmm.
way they indulged it was, oh, well, I'm going to worship Satan, or I'm going to be as evil as I possibly can.
And I'll just
I
and I'll
think,
get to hang out with others just like me. Most of them
yes,
anyway.
exactly. For a
Yeah.
lot of people, too, that's a way to sort of express power,
Yes.
to do good and get any kind of recognition or get ahead with it in life. That's a very rare thing. That's not really how it works. But to do evil and then all of a sudden you are famous, you feel powerful.
Yes.
To stand over a victim and see their eyes as you're torturing them, for a lot of people that gives them a sense of control that they
Yes.
don't have anywhere else in their lives. And for some of these killers, I do think that it was that they started, they say serial killers start with small things. They start by torturing
Mm-hmm.
animals.
Yes.
I think that's it. It's almost like chasing a high. That when they
Yes.
see, oh my gosh, look, I'm so powerful, I can snatch the life out of something. Well, then they need to keep going and going and going and
Right.
being more egregious and more brutal in order to get that sort of endorphin rush that they got from that first kill.
Right. Right. And a
So,
lot of in his thing was, it was, when you've got a group of people, but in other words, when everybody's done dirt, so you're bound to keep everybody else's secret, kind of thing.
right,
So in other words, if you're not up to, they make you do things
right,
just so that you've done something bad. So don't ever think about
That's
turning
right.
us
So
in.
yeah, you've got something to hide too, so you won't, like you said, you won't be the one to spill the beans on everybody else.
Right. And one time, getting back to that thing about hell, this is a really old interview that I hope, well, I want to say it was in the late 90s. This was Art Bell. This was, I want to say it was 97, 96, 98, and that Father Martin, Malachi Martin, he interviewed him. And he asked him one time, he says he had interviewed a woman who had been a Satanist. And the woman has said, well, my daughter died apparently as a small child. She did this, she didn't elaborate how the child died. Or I think her ex-husband had murdered the child. One of those things. She goes, well, I did something to make sure we would meet in hell. And Art Bell then asks Father Martin, even though he wasn't, he was a priest, but he wasn't a priest. But anyway,
Mhm.
asks him, is that possible? How can she say that? And he said, yes, that these people can do certain things so that, and I think to myself, I can't understand the concept of anybody, of any human being, wanting their afterlife to be in hell, and much less having your child there with them.
Oh
You
yeah, I
know,
can't imagine wanting to have my child there at all.
no, it's
There is that saying that it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. And I
right,
guess there really are people who feel like I would rather be in hell on my own terms rather
right,
than to be in heaven following God's rules.
okay,
And I always say the equivalent that we've probably seen to some degree in our own lives is most people know somebody who's living in pretty bad circumstance,
hmm,
but they won't leave the circumstance. Even if somebody
yes,
says, "I'll give you a place to stay, I'll take care of you, I'll help you," the
right,
people are just they're comfortable with it. They're used to it.
yes,
They like the control of it. And I think that that is just part of the human condition that sometimes we just choose against our own best interests. But I do
right,
agree. I can't imagine wanting my child to be suffering like
right.
that.
And I remember Art Bell was like, "What is she talking about?" And
Yeah.
basically, the Father Martin confirmed that for him, and it was one of those things that was left out there. Now let's fast forward. You released this book, Bandun Gate, now in 2022, and like I was telling you, I started reading it. It's fascinating. Just a little, and basically, what you're saying is what you wove in, what you had written about into, but a
Um,
fiction.
yeah, I started the way this book sort of came about was two things happened in my life right after I moved to Charleston. Charleston is
Okay.
sort of known as a haunted city. It's considered one of the
Yes.
most haunted places in America. So there's already sort of that undercurrent of dark vibes. It's a
Yes.
beautiful place, but there's that sort of spooky feeling too. And then two things happened very close together. One of them was I had been out sort of exploring in the marshes. There's a lot of just open country where there's it's just thick marshes and woods and not much going on, not a lot of development. And I was out there and I really did come across this very strange gate and fence. It was just this massive, massive structure that
Okay.
had all sorts of different odd adornments attached to it. It had there was one panel. The gate was at least three panels tall, and one panel was a life size, sort of like a representation of a human. It was a very odd mask, and then it had sort of like an old air conditioner was like the rib cage, and then it had these sort of pipes to be bones. But then it had all kinds of other stuff too, toys and tools and spoons and all these different weird things attached to it. And I'm a photographer too, so I took a bunch of pictures of it and I put them up on a website for South Carolina photography. And someone reached out to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you went out there. That place is considered haunted, and that gate was put there to sort of pen in evil spirits. And you shouldn't really be hanging around out
And you're
there."
like, oh yeah.
That had happened. And then around within a couple of days of me hearing that story, I got a phone call from my daughter. Was 21 ish at the time, 22. She was still living in Northern Virginia. She was living right outside DC, and I got a phone call from someone saying, "I've kidnapped your daughter." And in the background, I could hear screaming. I could hear a girl screaming. And he said, "If you don't do what I tell you, I'm going to start cutting her fingers off. I'm going to torture her." And I was trying to get as much information as I could, and he hung up. And he basically said, "Well, when I'll call later when you're ready to, to talk about what needs to be done." So I tried to get a hold of her, and she always has her phone. Abby always has her phone. She wasn't answering her phone. I called her work. She wasn't at work. I called my two sons were up
Oh,
there. Her brothers, they didn't know where she was. Her boyfriend didn't know where she was. We ended up calling in the police. Ultimately it was resolved. It was, and she's okay. She was okay. But then when I was telling somebody this story about what had happened to Abby, they said, "Oh, well, that probably, you shouldn't have taken her. I had taken her with me to that creepy gate." And they said, "Well,
okay,
maybe, something dark followed you." And I said, "Oh, no, she's fine." And they were like, "Well, how do you know she's fine? She's 500 miles away." And after that, I really did start thinking about, well, what if something terrible did happen? I mean, it's, what would I do, and how would it unfold? And
okay,
it really was a callback. When I worked on the Encyclopedia of Hell, my kids were little; they were really little then; they were infants, and I had more than one cleric tell me and saying, you have to be careful, because when you do any kind of research into demonology, you're opening a door.
yeah,
That's the one thing that demons love. They love attention. They want human interaction, and even just
yes,
doing something as simple as asking questions, you're kind of opening the door for them. And I
yeah,
just started thinking about all those things, and this book came from that. And then there are
that's great.
there's a the who ends up being the person who ends up being sort of the dark spirit in this. That's also based on a real person. There was a woman in South Carolina who was so evil that when she died, no church would take her body. They were afraid of her spirit, and finally, a church out in Clemson agreed they would take her and bury her there, but they had to wall in her grave. And over it's been about 100 years, and over the 100 years, that one area is constantly being struck by lightning. No matter how
What?
many repairs they do, the wall keeps crumbling. There are all kinds of terrible things that have happened out there, and the only words you can still read on this grave are "brother sorrow." Everything else has been obliterated, and the graves next to it are fine. Nothing else happened. There's graves literally.
So let me ask you something. I imagine something like this has she had to have been what, a murderess, right? She
Yes,
must have,
yes, she
okay,
was a killer. Yeah.
right. Because
And
people don't
there's not
realize.
a lot. No, there's very little known about her. Her name's Eliza Huger. There's not a lot of documented. There's a lot of rumors about her, and they also run the gamut from she was a prostitute who killed her Johns and stole their money, or she
Right.
was just a wild, out of control, woman who would just kill for thrills. There were rumors of witchcraft and of rituals and all sorts of things, but there is documentation that she's from Charleston, but she's buried in Clemson, which is about 2.5 hours away, and that's because nobody else would take her body. That she was that bad.
People don't realize that back then, people really took it.
Yeah,
Um, you know how you hear about people suicides not being allowed to be buried in
yeah,
churchyards and things like that? People don't realize back then what they considered undesirables or
yes,
thieves or murderers or suicides.
right.
Even in the afterlife, in other words, the good people didn't want to get buried. Or the paupers, they would put them in a corner over there in the
Right.
weeds.
They would put exactly. They just, as you said, they put them sort of in an unmarked field
Yeah.
somewhere, and they took that very seriously, the idea of
Yes.
sacred ground. And I think too,
Hmm.
the families and the people burying them worried that, well, if we defile sacred ground, something bad will happen to us, the
Yes.
living. So
Yeah. And even the families. It was one time, I was doing research for this was, of course, way back then about the brothels and things like that. And if your family was still in contact with you, they wouldn't even acknowledge you. Like in other words, they wouldn't even come and bury you or at least nothing.
yeah,
This was you were cut off as far
as
as
far as you were dead to the
guilt
family.
by association, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And and I was surprised because when you said a gate, I was thinking, was this like an old entrance to some very old place? But you're saying that basically what it was made up of was modern things. What was incorporated into the gate?
Yeah, it
Is
was, the gate itself was older, and I think as time went on, people kept adding to it. So it was something
okay,
that people over time were sort of adding their own touch to.
okay, I
Um,
understand now.
and as the generations go by, every new generation they want to put their stamp on it.
What lies beyond that in reality? Was it?
In
Is it?
reality, that was part of why it was so creepy, is because there's nothing back there that I could see. It is this incredibly tall, elaborate gate. There's not even a real road. It's like a little dusty path, but it's all overgrown. Nothing could get through there.
Right.
And that's part of why it just seemed very strange. It's visually, it's very stunning. It's very it's just so unusual, and the size of it and the obvious time that someone that obviously I know now many people have put into constructing it and maintaining it. But then there's just nothing there. There's no mailbox, there's no driveway, there's no house, there's
Like,
nothing.
right, right. This was the entrance to what? There's
Yeah,
nothing.
yeah.
Have you
My
ever been able
husband
to find out how
when
far back people?
when we were there, I actually went a couple of times. And when I was there the first time with my husband, we found it by accident. We were looking for something else, and we got off on this side road. We found it by accident. And I had my camera, and I said, "Oh my gosh, Dan, I have to take pictures. You have to stop and let me take pictures." So he stopped, and I'm taking all the pictures. When I got back in the car, he wanted to like drive under it to turn around, and I told him, "No way. Do not drive under that
Isn't that
gate."
crazy?
Yeah, even then, I didn't know anything about the evil. I didn't know anything about it. There was just something
Right.
about it. I was like, I've seen a lot of horror movies. I've read a lot of creepy books.
This
I've
is the
done
part where everybody gets in trouble.
exactly. This is like how this is how the really bad stuff starts. And even then, I was sort of half joking, but I wasn't. And then when I went back, same thing. I was like, "There's no way I'm going under there." And because that's what when I went back with Abby, my daughter, she loves everything scary and creepy and spooky. She wanted to
Uh
like go back in there and see what was there, and I was like, "No,
huh. No,
it's
no,
not
we're not going
happening."
there. It's not
No,
happening.
no.
Let me ask you, just out of curiosity, when you were doing that research on your first book,
Mhm.
the encyclopedia, did any weird stuff happen?
I did have a couple of strange things happen. The the most traumatic thing that happened was I would get really terrible. They weren't really like nightmares. They felt very real,
Mm-hmm.
and they always involved my children who were little at the time. My kids would have been
Yeah.
toddlers and infants. I had three within 3 years, so they were all really little. And what
Mm-hmm.
really made them upsetting, the dreams so upsetting, is that it was always bad things happening to my kids, and it was
Yeah.
always me doing it. It was me hurting the kids,
What?
or me,
Yes.
doing something awful to them, or leaving them in the middle of nowhere and just saying, "I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to be a mom anymore." And
And
that feeling really stayed with me. I mean, that was
yes.
really, if it had been somebody else attacking the kids, obviously that's a horrible thing. But then you wake up, you go check on them, they're in their cribs, they're fine, it's okay.
Right.
But just, sometimes it was violent things, but sometimes it was just very sort of shallow, petty things I was doing to them. And it was just terrible. It was really
Yes.
bad.
I
It
want
was
to
really,
say, for a mother, that's got to be one of the most scary
yeah,
things. I hate to say it, is something that has to do with your children.
yeah,
You know, endangering your
yeah,
child is like, talk about, this is the
yeah,
kind of stuff like, because I myself, you wake up and you go check on your kid
yeah.
just because the dream, if it has to do with them,
It's
forget it.
exactly, it's not something you can just shake off. I had
Yes.
other strange things happen there. I had strange things happen. I was writing this Bandun Gate book, and a lot of them were things that if they'd happened at a different time or once in a while, it wouldn't have seemed creepy.
Mm-hmm.
But there were things like, for example, we had lived in the house where I wrote the book. We had lived in that house for years. We had never had a bird hit the window. You know how sometimes birds
Right.
fly in the windows? Well, one day I was talking to my husband and I was saying, "Oh, I need to write a sequence here that shows that things are amiss. I'm thinking of having a bird hit the window." And as I said it, a bird flew into the window and broke its neck.
Oh my God.
So, a couple of things that happened like that right at the time that I was working on this book.
That
And things like
I'm
that were
sorry, that's not
horrible.
a coincidence. That isn't a
Yeah, that was
coincidence.
very strange. That was a really strange thing. My left one of the sequences I'd already written in the book was about a little boy and something bad happened to his hand, his left hand, and I would wake up for weeks after that with my left pinky was dislocated. I finally had to get a splint, and I was, and I kept asking the doctor, "How am I doing this? How am I doing this?" It didn't hurt, but when I woke
Right.
up, it would be dislocated and bruised. And I finally had to just get a splint to put it in. So weird things like that kept happening. And there might be perfectly coincidental
Right.
explanations, but the fact that they happened while I was writing it and in a very short time frame, in a time where nothing like that had happened, like
Right.
before or since, I haven't had a lot of weird things happen like that.
Right. And I understand exactly what you mean. Like like what you said, that the bird runs into your window. That
Yeah.
happens. You know,
Yeah.
I I used to I used to live in a two-story farmhouse, and I remember one time I come outside and I find a dead dove down at the
Right.
bottom, And I'm looking at him, and you could
Yeah,
tell that its neck, and I realized that it
neck.
had just flown into the window. I mean, it's not something, but the timing on that was pretty
Yeah, that was
unusual.
yeah, that it was not it was unsettling.
It'd
It was
be
not
like,
a good day to
okay.
yeah.
And see, things like that are so the basis of your book is that and what comes with it. In other words, that visit there innocently
Right.
enough.
And that's right. The setup of the book is that Abby and I decided to take her to show her this gate, and that she unwittingly brings something back
Okay.
from the gate. And the spirit of that she brings back is based on Eliza Huger, who is the woman I told you about, who is so evil that no one
Mm-hmm.
would accept her body. Um,
Right.
and then there's other, I try to bring in other local elements too. There's a lot of Gullah
Sure.
culture in there, and there's different Charleston ghost legends, and just try to weave it in so that it's a coherent narrative. But
Right. I mean,
a
I've been
lot
to
of it is
Charleston
based
a
on
few
real.
times, and I love to go to Charleston. There's a lot of stuff to see in Charleston. And I
Oh
know
yeah,
the Gullah that they have that Hant blue color. And
that's
I
right. That's right.
remember taking a we were we were taking a tour, and then we went back, and somebody pointed out one of the she goes, "Do you see these modern houses, how they've got that blue trim?" And I was like, "Yeah." And there he says they still use
That's
that
right.
Hant blue, somewhere in
Oh
the
yeah.
entryway or the doorways
Almost every
because
house here has that
yeah.
blue under. It's a lot of times, like you're saying, around the entryway or underneath, like the overhangs, because they
Mhm.
believe that spirits can't cross water. And then when the
Exactly.
spirits see it, they think it's water, so they'll stay away from it.
Right, right.
That
And
is
you
still
think
the
of that
case.
being an old stuff. No, they're still using that.
Oh yeah, that's still a big thing here. Yeah.
Have you ever been able to research how long that gate, well, I guess if anybody would make any mention of it or how long it's been out there?
The particular one that I found, I did a little bit of research on. It's all anecdotal, though. It's all like,
Right,
oh,
that's what
my
I'm thinking.
cousin lived back there, and she. So yeah, apparently it's been there in some form for a long, long time, generations and generations. There are lots of other similar
Really?
structures around Charleston too, which have very similar stories that they've been put up. You know how, like, if you ever go through Pennsylvania Dutch country, the farmers will put up hex signs at the barns to sort of ward off evil spirits.
Yes.
There's like an
Yes.
equivalent down here where they
Yes.
put up different things to scare away spirits, and they'll decorate fences and gates or put up posts, so that custom goes back to pre-Civil War days. I haven't
Wow.
got an exact date on the fence that sort of inspired this one, but it's generations.
Right,
It's at
because
least it's
let me ask
generations
something. Is
old.
this is the area that they consider low country, or is that more towards
Yes,
savannah?
yes.
Okay, it's all low country,
No,
right?
this whole strip. Yeah, that strip is
Yeah.
considered low country. Yeah, going from
Okay, that
in Gullah country too.
um
I guess the Sea Islands start really in the lowest part of North Carolina and go all the way to the sort of the top of Florida.
did you ever find anybody that knew how to explain what any of those elements meant? Like, oh, we put this in there because this is does that, or
Um,
was it just a
I got a
hodgepodge
couple
of
of
stuff?
I got a couple of different explanations of different specific things that made sense. One of the overarching things that they said is that if it's an object that was significant to the person who put it there, it's considered to
Mm-hmm.
have power. In Gullah tradition, Gullah teaches that there's a lot of power in things that people either used frequently, like a hairbrush or a broom or a comb, or things they used that were significant, like a pin that they wore on their wedding day, or a medal that
Right.
they'd won, or things that they had contact with right around the time of their death. That any object like that has specific and very sort of enhanced power, amplified
Okay.
power. So
Okay.
that's what we think. Some of the things on the gate were the things that were meaningful to the people who put them up. And then others they say are things that they like to distract spirits. Anything
Yes.
that has like a human face or sort of looks like a human, they like the idea that the ghost will go over and try to interact with that image rather than
Okay.
come after a real person. Goa lore
Mm-hmm.
teaches that the ghosts here, that most of them are, they call them skin shifters, not exactly
Mm-hmm.
a shape shifter, but that they're looking for new skins to wear. And so
Right.
anything you can do to sort of detract them. Not
Mm-hmm.
on this gate, but I have seen in other places. I don't know if you know, you're familiar with a bottle tree. That's
Yes.
another very, very specific thing that you see those a lot here, which is sort of what it sounds like. It's a wire frame, and then bottles go on it, sort of tipped upside down, with the idea that the spirit will go into the bottle and then become fascinated and just sort
Right.
of be captured there.
Right. Because I was going to ask you, it almost sounds like, a lot also they have that root work out in that
That's right.
area.
That's right.
Okay. Where they use exactly like what you're describing as
Right.
far as.
If you felt like, if you felt like, I've got this terrible stomach ache lately, and I think somebody has put a hex on. I think someone's put a
Mm-hmm.
spell on me. They would call it put the root on you. You would go to a root worker or a root doctor, and they would help you. They would help you remove the spell. A lot of root doctors here only do white magic. They won't cast spells, but they will help
Right.
you remove spells. And that's what they'll do. They'll say, okay, you need to take something, like, get a piece of paper, write the person who put the hex on you, write their name on the paper, and then get either dirt from like their footprint or something that they believed in and fold it up. And then you put that in your shoe and you walk around with that for 3 or 4 days, and it will lift these, it will sort of take the hex away. Um, that's just a very simple, basic
Right,
one. There's
right.
it's
Because
much
they
more
believe,
complex.
I want to say that there was a belief exactly like you bury stuff and,
Right,
whether it's to break the spell or even curse
right,
people, depending on, how they wanted to work it.
right.
Um, and I mean, the root work also goes into, what they call, charms, like,
That's right.
attract, let's say,
Yes,
love spells, things of that
yes.
nature.
And
But,
protection, there's protection spells
mm-hmm,
for children. And a very common thing to see down in South Carolina is if you go to a graveyard to see coins on the graves, that's
mm-hmm,
part of that too. You pay coins sometimes to protect, or to, specific coins, are for specific honors. Like if you served in the military with someone, you would leave a very specific coin. If you knew the person personally, you would. Sometimes the coins you leave for people you don't like, because you're trying to like say, hey, it's like a bribe. Hey, leave me alone. And one thing you never ever do, you do not take anything out of the graveyards here.
oh
In
no.
children's graves, people leave toys. It's very common to
Yes,
go to a child's grave that's 150, 200 years old, but you can see there are new toys on it, or toys that didn't
yes.
exist then. And that's usually someone in the family, or someone who wanted to pay homage to the dead or to the family. And yeah, you never don't take anything. Do not
Right.
take
Yeah.
anything
I
out of the
tell
graveyard.
people don't realize that a lot of, and as a matter of fact, where I was going was when I asked you about where was that gate, I was thinking, was there like a cemetery, or how they have these old
Mhm.
family
Oh
graveyards
yeah, yeah.
nearby? I was thinking maybe this was a reference point
It
to.
could be.
No,
It
and some of these
yeah.
family graveyards, they're like,
Oh yeah, that's very common out here too. Like you're saying, you'll be just out in the middle of nowhere, and then
yeah,
all of a sudden there's, sometimes it's just one or two, but sometimes it's a couple of dozen with nothing
yes,
else around them, or maybe like a little house that's sort of, overgrown, and it's
yes,
obvious nobody's living there, but the graves are still there. And
right,
people still put flowers on graves. Again, I've seen graves that are so old you can't read the stones, but if you
yes.
go there, you can tell people have come and put flowers there, and I think it's just a generalized sign of respect.
Right, and people don't realize that in some of these graveyards, there's even with root work, there's stuff that's done with graveyard dirt,
Mhm,
and a
that's
lot
right.
of times, like you said, there's stuff that's, if you want to look on it on a metaphysical level, that's inside. Everybody always thinks of the graveyard. Well, if there's going to be any ghosts, it'll be the people that are buried there. But you'll have a lot of people that will take spell work items and dispose of
Mhm.
them in and around graveyards and things like that. So yes,
Oh
I
yeah.
agree. You have to be real careful. Don't take anything. Just
No,
leave it there.
it's bad karma. You're asking
It's
for
bad
something bad.
karma.
It's
Yes,
disrespectful.
it
It's
is. It
nothing else.
is.
Even if you don't want to believe in the ghost, just do out of respect. Don't mess with stuff in the
Exactly.
graveyard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And your book, again, getting back to it, is innocently, and then something attaches, and that's the
Mhm.
premise of your book,
Mhm.
is what comes after an innocent visit to
Right.
what you.
Exactly. And then the rest of the book is okay, how do you set things right again? How do you get rid of an evil spirit? How do you get rid of an evil spirit without doing evil yourself? That's a lot of what the rest of the
Good
book is
question,
about.
huh?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that's the thing that I want to say. You might think of olden times people were superstitious, or you want to call them ignorant, but it's almost like in modern times when people with their disbelief, it's like your disbelief makes you ignorant. Let's
Right.
let's 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 use that situation that you describe in your book. Here you are, a person living in modern times
Right.
where none of this is supposed to exist. You
Right.
know,
And people would call you crazy if you called the police. If I called the police and said my daughter's been kidnapped, they'll come out and send somebody to help me. If I call them up and say my daughter's been kidnapped by a ghost, I'll be lucky
no,
if I don't get committed. I mean, no one
sure,
will help me.
sure,
So
yes, and I
I
tell.
actually, I had I talked to an exorcist who said that one of the things that they have to deal with all the time is, yeah, that people don't take it seriously, that they
Yes,
either joke about it or that
yes,
they act like, oh, it's no big deal. And he said, it's hard to work with families and everything when or people, the people that you have to be in contact with, when they have kind of a flippant attitude about it. But like you said, I mean, you could at least, even if you don't believe it, at least look into it, do a little research. Don't immediately dismiss
yes.
it as, oh, this is just silly.
Well, what happens is you even talk to certain, and I'm not even going to say Catholic priests, different religions, and if somebody would ever walk in there, I'm not even talking possession, but something, hey, something weird or whatever, or I think they kind of like either look at you first of all to. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad idea to assess are you mentally ill, but
Right.
they're gonna write it off to everything but that, considering
Right.
that they work in the spiritual area. If you
Right.
belong to a church, they don't want to go there.
Well, for a lot
It's
of clerics, that's part of the process. And again, not just Catholic, because other faiths and
yes,
religions do
exactly.
have exorcism too, but a lot of them, that's part of the process, is before they will even consider that maybe an exorcism needs to be done, they will rule out everything else. Like they'll
Sure.
say, could it be a food allergy? Did you eat something or drink something that's affecting the person?
Yes.
Could it be a mental issue? Could it be a gag? Could it be a hoax? They will try to rule out everything else. The other thing that the exorcist told me is that if you go to a cleric and ask for an exorcism, one of the first things they'll ask is, why do you want it done? And there's only one answer that they'll accept. If you say, I want it done because my loved one's in pain or because I'm worried or I don't want somebody to get hurt, they will, try to help you, but they will not do an exorcism. The only reason that they'll do an exorcism is if you say, I want to dispel the evil and I want to reconcile to God. And
Right.
part of the reason they do that is because, again, they're trying to sort of, they're trying to get rid of the like you were
Right.
saying, the sensationalists or the people who are just thinking, oh, this is kind of interesting, or the alarmists, the people who,
Yeah. Sure.
maybe their child has a seizure and there's a real legitimate medical condition, and
Mm-hmm.
and instead of going that route, they're thinking, well, I'll just go to the priest, he'll throw some water, he'll say some prayers, and we're all
Yes.
good to go. So they really take that seriously
Oh
too.
no, no. I understand
Oh
totally
yeah.
why they have to, but I guess there's a difference between you go to a cleric and let's say you say, look, and after a while, if you deal with people,
Yeah.
you have a pretty fine tune of when you're encountering somebody that might
Yeah.
have some type of break with reality versus
Right.
somebody that you could tell is legitimately something's going on and they've come to you because you deal in spiritual matters, right?
Right.
And you believe them, but you're saying, look, internally, I've got to rule this out. Their attitude is different.
Right.
There's a
Oh
possibility,
yeah, yeah. And you're
but
right too. There's definitely a
first,
stigma.
you know what? Even if they don't tell the person, let me rule out these regular. But then there's the people that they don't out and out believe it, period, even if
Right.
they deal in spiritual stuff. And one time I was telling them, I said, you know what they do believe? It's just they're afraid of going there and actually
Yeah.
finding themselves actually encountering something that they might not know how to handle despite supposedly knowing how to.
Yeah, that's so for a lot of people that, like you said, that's a coping mechanism. It's sort of the idea of, if I don't turn on the light, I don't have to see what's there. And
Yes.
you're right. For a lot of people, it's like they don't want to face even the possibility that maybe
No.
there's something more going on that can't neatly be controlled and it can't be,
Right.
scientifically explained. A lot of people just don't want to even think about
They
that.
don't want to. You come to them with like, "Oh, my marriage is in trouble. My kid is
Yeah.
misbehaving. I'm having a personal. Okay, yeah, I can help you with that. Absolutely, no problem.
Yep.
We're with you. But you come there and you start talking about, look, there's weird, unexplainable things going on in my house,
Yeah,
or
that's
maybe
right.
even, or something like that. And they'll be like, huh? Oh, no, no.
Yeah.
And it's like,
You watch too
wait a
much
minute.
TV, or yeah,
Yeah,
they
it's
want
like,
to blow it off. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's
like,
true.
yeah, you sure? I had, when I was doing some paranormal investigations, I haven't done some in a bit. I went to see this gentleman who, that's exactly, he's Catholic, and he'd been living in this house for like 30 something years. He'd been living there a long time. And he had weird things started going on. And he was a regular churchgoer to the same church because he'd been
Mhm.
living there. And he tried to approach one of the priests, and he said that the priest was like, okay, okay, and he kind of did a very
Yeah.
hasty house
Yeah.
blessing on him, like that's it.
Yeah.
And he says, look, I stopped pushing it at my church because I didn't want to be that guy, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. You don't want to be the crazy guy.
I didn't want to like, I didn't want to
Yeah.
be that guy that is like, and you could tell that he says that priest, I mean, if
Yeah.
he, he
Yeah.
did,
He didn't want anything to do with it.
he just sprinkled some water, blessed the house, and he
Yeah.
was like gone.
He was ready to
Didn't
move
ask,
on. Yeah.
didn't want to move on, didn't know, like what's going on,
Yeah.
considering
No
that this
question.
is even a regular parishioner. And this is the part that to me, when he was telling me that, I go, here's whether it was this priest, even though, they rotate priests. If
Mhm.
you've been a regular churchgoer to this parish for X amount of
Yeah.
times,
He would know you.
and you're like a regular person, what would make this regular person
Yeah. Suddenly one day wake up and say, hey, something
come
creepy
in and
is
say,
happening.
I need your help because I can't understand what's going on in my house?
Yeah.
Which would think, okay, there's something here that I need to, help this person with.
Yeah,
Whatever.
you're right. It seems like you said, he would know the person well enough to at least give them a
Yes.
chance. Yeah. A lot
Right.
of people, though,
Right.
like you said, it makes people uncomfortable, and even clerics and priests. I think a lot of
Yes.
them are like you said, they're okay with doing sort of the basic stuff, but they don't want to go to that next level.
No, no, they don't. They don't. That's why I'm saying that in modern times, being modern basically
Mhm.
makes us ignorant. If, let's say,
Right.
on the premise of your book, if you ever ran into a situation like that, where it's like, let me ask you, and I'm going without giving your book away, at what I imagine is your character at the beginning doesn't connect the dots as to why these things are happening, or
No, no, not
okay,
really. And that's really how I am. That's why I'm saying I came up as a research writer. I've always sort of, whenever I'm working on a project, I sort of do it like, almost like from 3,000 feet above, where I'm just sort of looking. It's like putting a puzzle together. It's not
yes,
really taking a position on it. The Encyclopedia of Hell doesn't take any position on what of this is true or which of these is right. It just sort of presents the information. And so,
right,
yeah, it would take a while to really feel like, is there something going on? Could there even be something going on? And then realizing, yeah, something serious is going on. And then, of course,
right.
the next step. Okay, now what?
Well,
Now what?
and this is the thing that I think a lot of people, because we know you always get it. Let's go down the Judeo-Christian, the devil. Let's make a bargain, or he wants your soul, and I think sometimes people don't understand when you're talking something hellish. Let's go. There is sometimes they don't. There is no bargain to be made. They don't want
Right,
a bargain. You know,
right. That's
it's
right.
not like I want your soul. Maybe what I want is
Right.
just to destroy you, or whatever,
Yeah.
or destroy the. There's no moral compass. No. Oh well, let's figure this out. And sign here, and I'll have your soul when you die. That typical
Right. No.
Faustian
Yeah. There's no
thing.
like Dr. Faust showing up with the contract that you're going to sign in blood.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's just no, or hatred for the sake of hatred. I think a lot of
Right.
human beings don't understand that concept unless you're a psychopath. And even then, they're not emotional anyway. But
Right.
there's hatred for the sake of hatred or destruction, or, you even when you see murders, you always see love, revenge,
Hmm.
obsession, all these typical human emotions, of course, that go off
Yeah.
they
That
end up in
belongs
murder.
down somewhere.
But haven't you seen those stranger on stranger murders where somebody murders
Mhm.
somebody? They have no grudge, no nothing with
Right.
them,
No connection.
no connection. I don't love you, I don't hate you, I don't know you, but they
Right.
still kill them, and sometimes in horrible ways. And I think to the average human being, it's very difficult to imagine. Let's say in this case, uh, a paranormal entity that would
Right.
think like that. Not like a human being that you could tackle and shoot them or
That's
whatever, or
right.
arrest them.
Yeah,
You
we had
know,
somebody worse.
yeah, it's like here's something that's non-corporeal, I imagine in some cases, but why do you want to do this to me? In this case, because wrong place, wrong time, or you said the wrong thing,
Right.
or
And one of the big things with ghosts is if it's a ghost, they usually have a personal mission they want to accomplish.
mm-hmm.
A demon just wants to destroy things and cause
Yes,
trouble. So
yes.
you're right. A ghost, at least, you would, if you were ever to come in contact with a ghost, the best you would hope for is maybe I can help them with their mission.
Sure.
But
Like
a
I'm,
lot of
I'm gonna
times,
I'm gonna rest in peace. I'm gonna what
yeah,
is it?
whatever
Have you
they
ever
need
seen that
closure
movie The
for.
Changeling by any chance?
Oh yeah, boy, I've seen
The
that.
one with George C. Scott?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
I think
Or
it's
even
great
like
because it
I'm thinking more recently, like remember Sixth Sense, that the ghosts that were haunting, they really just wanted some kind of, they just wanted closure. They had some
well,
sort of unfinished business.
if you ever look at the movie of The Changeling, at the end of the book, well, no, I'm sorry, the movie, he basically he found out who the child, who the ghost or the
Mhm.
child was, found out this whole dark history of what happened and why the child was killed, digs him up basically, and he still keeps going. He's asking, "What do you want?" Because he's under the premise that I've helped you. I'm trying to
Right.
they lay the ghost, and the thing still keeps going. The haunting still escalates. But we're always under that. What you're saying, well, if I help you,
Yeah.
whatever it
Yeah.
was, you were murdered, and hey, we
Yeah.
find out who the murderer was, or
Right.
nobody
Or you
knew what
want to
happened to
warn
you.
your kids or something that something bad is coming, or yeah, whatever it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
get
yeah,
justice. Yeah.
right. We always have like a resolution, but I think that that's what makes your book so intriguing. The
Oh,
premise of what I read so far, which is like, how do you deal when it's not your typical, like, oh, I'm going to, help you find peace, with a ghost, like
yeah.
you said, the human entity thing.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
sometimes if in a lot of ghost stories, what the ghost wants is something that's going to imperil you anyway. I mean, if the
Yes.
ghost says, "Oh, I'm here for the mission," and the mission is you help me kill somebody,
Yes.
that's a tough choice. It's like, well, do I go along with helping the mission, which means I'm now a murderer, or do
Hmm.
I, in this case, let them harm a family member, or let some other terrible thing happen? It's
Yes.
it's a tough choice.
Right. What if they want vengeance? Hey, that guy killed me, or I
Yeah,
want you to, like, let's even the score for me. I can't do it,
yeah,
so I want you to do that for me, and then I'll rest easy. You know,
yeah.
there's
And
so
then
many
I'll leave your
ways.
family alone. Yeah.
Right. I'll leave your family alone, and people don't realize. I think that that has got to be one of the most terrible things. It's not what one of something like that could do to you. It's what they could do to somebody that you love.
Yeah,
You
I think
see?
a lot of that obviously came from back when I was having the dreams about when I was writing the Hell book and I was having dreams. It was always bad things happening to my kids, and I guess in this recent book, it then comes down to okay, well then how far would I go to help them? And
Yes.
what would I commit atrocities to help them? And if I don't, does that make me a bad mother? I'm sure that all of that started back in the day when I was having all the dreams that
That.
came with researching hell.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes when you read about stuff like that, you realize that some of these things, it's a lot of they even when you see movies like this, people don't ever realize what if that was a reality for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would my first thing be
Right. Yeah.
besides going on Google? It's like
Yeah.
and
Go
and
on.
and
Looking for
and the
that.
reason why I know this is I've interviewed exorcists as well, and I had one. He's retired now, Archbishop Enbright and Ronald, okay, and he's retired, but he had a really, really, really serious health thing, like during an exorcism,
Wow.
and even when he went to the hospital afterwards, I believe it that he had gotten liquid around his heart. It was a really,
Oh my
really,
goodness.
really serious, like a and the doctors couldn't quite figure out how this happened. In other words, this wasn't somebody that had some type of illness, and maybe it got
Right.
aggravated. No, it was like they couldn't understand how this had occurred to him health wise in his body. And I
Wow.
mean, he was describing to me, and he had been doing it for many years. And this was basically he was not feeling good during one of the exorcisms. And some people could say, well, the timing on it or what was going on. But yeah, you see a lot of people that deal with that on a regular basis. That sometimes, you could say, well, things happen to people, but sometimes, just like that bird hitting the window, when
Yeah,
you're
that's right.
saying, when you're talking
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah,
it's like, okay,
there's it feels like there's more going on. Feels like it's
there's more
not just something that just
coincidences.
popped out of nowhere. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. I think that. All right, so are you planning another book, or what are you gonna do? Are you gonna continue the?
I'm writing another book now, but it's a different kind of book. It's about the paranormal, but it's sort of a different take.
Really?
It's not as much horror. It's more suspense. Yeah. It's about
Okay.
a mother who is convinced that her son has a paranormal ability. The father thinks that it's just in the mother's mind, that she's sort of, created this mythology around her son. The crazy friend thinks maybe there's dark forces going on, that the kid's possessed or whatever. And the police think maybe the kid is a budding serial killer. And so it's sort of like, well, which of these, what's really going on with this kid?
Or all of the above? Hey,
Or yeah, some combination
you
or
know
something
why?
completely different.
I tell everybody. I don't know if you remember that it was based on a Stephen King, the Rose Red, the one that the house that was in
Oh yeah,
Seattle.
that's right. Yeah,
That they stick all these bunch of psychics. They're trying to prove,
right.
a professor. And I tell everybody there's one psychic and who's a real jerk, a real jerk. And I tell everybody thinks that because you're psychic, you're like enlightened. You
Right.
could be a real jerk or a serial
Yeah,
killer and still be psychic.
that's right.
Everybody, we've got this idea that if you're psychic, you're enlightened,
Yeah,
and
flowers in your hair and rainbows and yeah,
exactly, and yeah, exactly.
doesn't
Namaste,
really
whatever.
count anyway.
And you could be highly psychic and
Yeah,
be a real piece of work. People need to stop thinking that,
yeah.
those two shall not, no,
That's
yeah,
right. That's right. That they can't coexist.
that they can't coexist. Like, no, you're not going to be gifted with being psychic if you're a, a
Yeah.
jerk. I'm trying to, but that sounds like a great book.
Oh well,
That sounds
thank
like a
you.
great book, And the reason why I ask is that sometimes some of these books, when you write them, these characters take on a life of their own. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like,
Yes.
I want
Yeah.
to. Unlike the movies, you want the sequel in the book version.
That's
You know what
right.
I'm
Yeah.
saying?
You never want a good book to end. When you're reading a good
No.
book, there's always that sort of sorrow when you close the back
Yes, like,
cover. You just
oh
feel like,
no,
oh, it's
she
going
killed the
into a world.
character. Why did she kill the
Yeah.
character?
And so
Right,
just when
yeah.
you walk away from that world, you feel like you were part of it, and now
Yes.
it's all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's over.
Yes,
So, but
exactly,
you're right. I
exactly.
don't know why, but you're right. But in a movie, you want resolution. You don't want open ended.
Very
You want it
sequels are really
immediately
good.
kind of. Yeah.
But I don't know if it's the imagination part that you do with
Well,
the
maybe that's
reading,
it.
you know. But yeah, of course, with good writing, you have these characters that are three dimensional. They're like real
Right.
people, and like, you're thinking, what happened? Okay, even though the book or the story, it's the end,
Yeah.
you always think the aftermath. What happened?
Right.
What
That's right. What
if?
happens next? Where are they now? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, Miriam, it has been absolutely wonderful to talk to you,
Well,
and
thank you.
I let me tell you something. What little I read, it's a fascinating book, and especially that story that you told about, how stuff that happens without you thinking about it.
Yeah.
How you had all this information from when you were researching that book. How many years? 20 years before?
Yeah, it was more than 20 years because the research started back before the internet. To research a reference book, it took 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
because I'd have
Mm-hmm.
to go, talk to people, and I'd have to get books that maybe there's only a few copies in the country,
Yes.
or
Right. That
talk
you'd
to
have to have the book shipped over to the library and
yeah. All the
yes.
movies I saw, there was no Netflix or anything then. I'd have to
No.
find people who had copies of the movies and get them to let
Yes.
me watch it.
Yeah.
So
Oh
yes,
boy.
it was so
Yeah, once
expensive.
upon a time they had Blockbuster and
Yeah, that's
you
right.
could ask and you could even at some point I think some libraries also would get you
That's
but
right.
people
Yeah.
don't realize it's not as instant as it is now.
No, no.
especially if
I
it
mean,
was
I was lucky.
something.
I lived in DC, so I had there were a lot of great libraries there where they could get me stuff. But you're right, it's not like now. Now you can get whatever you want whenever you want, which
What
is
was it?
nice.
There was a movie I read about lately that it was this is William Shatner started it right before he became Star Trek Captain Kirk. Oh my God, what was the name of it? Not Incantation. Was it
Oh,
Incantation?
Devil's Rain.
No, no, it wasn't Devil's Rain. It was
Was
that
it the
they fit.
one?
Oh God, that he filmed it. Um,
Oh, and he and
um,
Loretta Swit, I think, was in it. They were in a
no,
Winnebago on vacation,
no. I know
and
you're talking about.
oh, that's a different one.
No,
He
that's
did a couple of
with
good
this is it
good
was
films.
filmed in all things in this made up language called Esperanti.
Oh
Okay, black and
wow,
white, which they didn't have to. But anyway, it was had to do with Satanism and weird stuff and whatever, whatever. Bottom line, the film got kind of cursed because people dropped dead. Obviously, not William Shatner; he's still alive, my God. But
yeah,
for some reason, this movie disappeared. And they
oh
finally
wow,
found a copy of it like in 1991 in an archive in France. In other words, in the United States,
wow,
forget it. It imploded, so they released it in Europe and in France, and then it did like this slow bloop. And in 91, they finally found a copy of it, like in the movie theater or
wow.
something. You know, that we were talking about these films that sometimes to do research,
Yeah,
if you
that's
try to
right. Yeah,
find it, it's
it's
not
hard.
like now,
No.
you know,
Even
uh,
now, if you couldn't even get the whole movie, you could at least get a clip. I mean, most
a
places
clip.
you could at least see part of it. But yeah,
Yeah, and they
it
even
was
say
weird.
back then there was a lot of these old Hollywood films that they by the time they actually discovered them and they opened them, they had been ruined,
Right, there was
inside
a
the
stuff inside.
canisters and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
it's terrible, isn't it, to think about how much was lost.
Yeah, especially in the what they call the pre-code Hollywood
Mhm.
before the even let me tell you something. Back then, people were wild. Everybody thinks of let me tell you something.
Yeah,
Those 20s were something else
yeah, there's
in
some crazy
Hollywood.
stuff going on. True.
Again, Miriam, it has been absolutely wonderful to speak to you, and I want to wish you the
Thank you.
best
I've
of
had a
luck
great time
on
too.
likewise. Take care, and I'll be staying on top of what. By the way, before I forget for my podcast listeners, because I am putting a link to your website on the credits of the show. What is your website address?
It's miriamvanscott.com.
Okay.
And you can also, I think I also link to it on my Amazon author page. So if you just go to
Okay.
Amazon and put in either Encyclopedia of Hell or Bandung Gate or just my name, it'll pull up that.
Perfect. Again, thank you so much and take care.
Thank you, Marlene.
Bye bye, Miriam.
Bye.
Okay. Yay. See, I'm telling you, it took all my will willpower to end this interview because I could talk to her for so much longer. But then again, I don't want her to dissect the book and give it away. The idea is to read it. What I meant was, I started reading, that Amazon offers you a preview of the book, X amount of pages or whatever. I started reading it, and wow. And then I was like, wait a minute, it's referring to an older book that she had from the late 90s. And I was like, but is this fiction or nonfiction? Because that first one is nonfiction. I was like, what? And I think it's great. I think I love that. And as a writer, I understand what she means about archiving things because I will run across stories and research and things and I just take it down because sometimes I don't have the time or it just doesn't fit into what I'm trying to do at that particular moment. But it's like I can't let this go. I just can't because I'm not going to trust it to my memory because I know forget it. So you see me, I've got a little, thank even though I put a lot of stuff on my phones, I've got, those little things from the 80s, well loved, well, 80s and 90s called the stickies. I've got my little pad of stickies somewhere on my desk anyway. You see me always like writing these little notes. And then after a while, I've got all these little stickies all over my desk. And then I just take them and hopefully I've kind of put an explanation. It's like, okay, do this, because I don't want to let it go. And then I research it. And even if I have to, you know, put away the information, I leave it there because I'm going to come back to this. And I do. And sometimes it's taken me a couple of years and I do get back to stories and ideas and exactly like what she was saying, information, just information. And I want to stress this because I've said it before in other shows, like once upon a time, You had to pay to develop film. Yes, believe it or not. Once upon a time, which she's describing, you had to do research, as in the legwork. And when I mean legwork, I mean legwork. Um, in other words, you had to go to library, um, haul around, depending on what you were, researching. Was it something like a hefty book, or you needed to? What was it that sometimes you see some of these older movies from the 80s and the 90s, and you'll see students, and you'll see them with all these heavy books or things at their table, and it's like, you know what, that world doesn't exist anymore because everything is instantaneous, where we have access to it on the internet. YouTube. How do I do that? Let me find a YouTube video of how to do, DIY, or you can find it on the internet. And once upon a time, so my point being that when you put so much work into research, you kept every little bit of it, even if at that moment you couldn't really do anything with it. When you came across something that you were like, this is too good, I got to keep this. So I can understand why she kept all this research, even the stuff that she didn't use in her original book. And look, little did she know that 20 something years later she would use it. That, yeah, once upon a time, research was the R word. It was research, truly. Okay, especially if you were looking into something obscure, and if you wanted to be accurate, especially if you were writing anything that was supposed to be nonfiction or reference book. And I think that's so. And that story that she told about coming across this gate out of nowhere. And for those writers out there, this, I think, and even there's so many writers that will say the idea for their books start out just like that. Something normal that they run across, either a scene or something like this, where they come across something that is so, maybe at the beginning it doesn't seem unusual, but it's the seed from which everything then flowers as far as the idea. And what she said that she starts finding out, and then she does the tie-in. What would happen if I found myself in this predicament after running across this, which at first glance is nothing. It's maybe a very unusual structure, a gate out in the middle of nowhere, and it's very curious. But then you think, I think that let me tell you, I gotta read the book, because stuff like that is fascinating, and God knows she has a lot of good reference material to insert into it. As a matter of fact, I am going to read you guys what the little snippet says. When you go to Amazon, that they give you like a little synopsis, and basically it says Bandun Gate. All right, and it's if I can get this to cooperate. Let's see, hold on. It says ghosts and demons are very different creatures, but sometimes they keep company. When I wrote a book about hell, I never dreamed the demons would come after me. Now, 2 decades later, dark spirits I had unwittingly riled have descended on Charleston, South Carolina, intent on revenge. Led by the malignant spirit of an executed murderess, the unholy alliance has set its sights on my only daughter, Abby. Wow. Okay. Let me tell you something right there for all the paranormal paranormal enthusiasts. Let me tell you something. That's the deal, baby, right there. So anyway, guys, please subscribe, like wherever you find us, whether it's YouTube, any of the other video platforms, podcast platforms, so you can keep track of when we release shows. You can go to miamighostchronicles.com and sign up for my newsletter on Substack. I put out there weird little articles, writing projects, things of this nature. Right now, I'm in the middle of one of my Sybil Universe stories. It's actually my fifth in the series. There's two full length and two novellas. This is the third full length, but it's the fifth in the series of the Sybil Chronicles and paranormal suspense thriller. I'm hoping to have it out sometime this year. Because I'm also, if you go to Erie.news, I've also, like every other day, I've put out a small segment about weird news, weird, unusual stuff. God knows, there's other news that's like it's too worrisome. Let's go off into weirdo land. So I do Erie.news, not ErieNews.com, Erie.news, and you can find articles there. And like I said, every other day or the most every second day, I'll put out a broadcast about weird news that's going on around the world, unusual things. And of course, if you want to listen to any of the podcast versions of the show, go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com. I have links there where you can listen to the podcast on the browser or download the MP3 files without commercial interruption. Without commercial interruption. Because, yes, I'm on all the major podcast platforms, but as you know, they do insert advertising. So, depending, and I know some people, it's like, I want to stick to my regular stuff, my podcast platform or my video platform, that's great. But if you ever want to listen to something without any stops for videos, go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com. And of course, there you can email me any ideas, stories, suggestions, whatever the case might be. By all means, go there, check it out. I've got a lot of interesting stuff on there. And I've got a lot of fantastic guests coming on, like great guests coming on. New people like Miriam, returning guests like others. And some of them I haven't talked to them since like 2017, 18, 19, 3, 4, 5 years. A lot of things have been happening with them. Okay, so it's almost like having a new guest. So I guarantee you guys, I've got interesting people coming on. And of course, I'll remind you all, you're all wonderful. And thank you very much for coming back every week and sharing this time with me. See you soon.